Okay, guys, a huge welcome to you all this evening. This is the second in our series of webinars for 360. And before we go any further, I just want to thank all of you for being here with us. If you were with us for the first webinar, thank you so much. If you've come back, again, thank you. And to anybody new joining us, welcome. I hope you're going to find this just a really nice, relaxed evening. A bit of a fireside chat. I was just saying I would have had the fire on, but it's a little bit warm. So we'll go with this. So everybody, tonight we are looking at lessons from military leadership, okay? And we have with us Tom Petch, Mike Bates, and Helen Seymour, all of whom are speakers with 360. So before we move on, I'll do a quick intro to everybody. Let's start with Mike. Mike is our former covert operations leader. He well, gosh, in any of these books, an impressive background. He was the first person in MOD history to qualify for the highest levels of frontline operations in the global war on terror. He was the fastest British solo rower in the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, and he raised over very close to £140,000 for charity there. He is an accomplished Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, gosh, I can't say that word tonight, and coach. And he's the founder of NX45, which promotes mental health and redefines modern masculinity. When it comes to speaking, he has a very authentic and dynamic style, which blends tales of being right there on the front line with empowering guidance, okay? And his impact is always to leave audiences inspired and equipped to face challenges. All right, he's a good one to have around. And he's had a pretty busy week. Welcome to you, Mike.
Thanks, Tracey. Great to be here.
Good, lovely. Next up, we've got Tom Petch. So Tom is our former SAS commander. I love saying that, Tom. That's a very cool thing to be able to say, isn't it? He's also an author and a film director. And yes, indeed, he has a background as a former SAS commander. He's the founder of Salt Film and Dark Wave Film, and he directed, some of you may have seen it, the award-winning film, The Patrol. Okay, he's also the author of Speed, Aggression, Surprise, which is a book that uncovers the true origins of the SAS. He's a huge supporter of veteran charities, and his presentation style when it comes to speaking is he's combining his military insights with a real narrative artistry. His impact is to leave practical strategies for leadership, resilience, and innovation. Okay, welcome to you, Tom.
Thank you, Tracey.
Helen, hello.
Hi.
Helen, let me just put you in the picture. Helen has had an awful week. She's been properly poorly with COVID. So I'm so glad that you joined us.
Sorry if I get a coughing fit.
It's okay. You're what are you dosed up with? Pneumonia?
That's it.
Helen is our former fast jet pilot. She was the first woman to pilot the Eurofighter Typhoon in combat. She started out in medicine, that's right, isn't it? Studying medicine at university and moved through into aviation. Huge, kind of overcome some quite big setbacks, didn't you, as sort of one of the first women in that sort of area, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And Helen is always she teams up with her former navigator pilot Rosie, who I'm sure is on the call tonight. Hello, Rosie. Her presentation style is very, oh gosh, and you spend any time with Helen and you'll realize how dynamic she is, just full of energy, full of stories, and is just brilliant at empowering her audiences with that kind of can-do attitude. Isn't that right?
Maybe not with COVID, but I do try. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to you all. Okay, so before we get into it, just to give you an idea of what to expect tonight, we're going to split the conversation into 3 different parts. So, okay, we're going to look at resilience with Mike, we're going to look at creativity with Tom, and we're going to look at, Helen's going to jump into. Helen, what are you going to be talking about, Helen?
Sort of making decisions under pressure.
Decision making under pressure. Exactly that. All right. So we're going to open the conversation up. Oh, and then afterwards we're going to jump into some Q&As. So please feel free to drop those into the chat box. Okay. Right. we're going to start with you, Mike, if that's okay.
Of course, fire away.
Good. All right. So, Mike, you talk about resilience an awful lot, and the idea of sort of building that wall of resilience, and evidence, sort of creating that evidence. Can you elaborate for us on how setting and achieving goals contributes to this process?
Absolutely. Well, look, a massive good evening to everybody joining us. Thanks for making the time. It's a privilege to be here. Thanks for asking us, Tracey. Look, I mean, we're all searching for resilience, right? Life is tough. There's no doubt about it. There's no escaping that. And so the thing that I actually think we need to develop is self-belief. Because the question I get asked the most when I speak on stage is, Mike, how do you deal with a 40-foot wave in the dead of night in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, or you're going to war with the Marines, or you're fighting terrorism on the front line? And the honest truth is you don't know how you're going to cope. And so you need to have a certain amount of self-belief that you're able to overcome whatever obstacle is put in front of you. And the way I believe you do that is by building what I call a wall of evidence. And so the way it works for me is that every time you set a goal that's just slightly beyond your grasp, excuse me, and you move towards that goal, you may fail, but at least you've attempted it. You put another brick in the wall. And failing's part of the process. Everyone wants to be perfect. It's not going to happen. You know, feedback is a gift, and failure is a gift as well, because it means you can fine tune and you can get even better. And you keep placing these bricks in the wall, and you do it again and again and again. And this wall becomes bigger and stronger, and it becomes a fortress of self-belief. And so when you're faced with something that you're just not sure whether you're capable of overcoming it, could be the loss of a family member, the breakdown of a relationship, failed business, whatever it is, you can turn around and see the wall of evidence, and you know you've got what it takes. So it's all about self-belief for me. It's not something you can read in a book and learn. It's not something you're born with. It's a craft. It's a skill that's developed over time of constantly setting small, incrementally bigger goals. And then you can do whatever you want. Simple as that.
That must have come into play for you in a big way when you were doing that row, that solo row.
Yeah, I mean, by far, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought naively that I was going to enjoy the solitude. Everyone kept saying, oh, it'd be great, you know, disconnect from the noise and enjoy. Let me tell you, nothing good happens alone. It is debilitating. True solitude. I didn't see anyone for 46 days and nights. And you start to lose your cognitive ability. You go into full survival mode. You're longing to connect to anything that moves. I was talking to the fish, the sun, the stars, the dolphins, anything, to try and connect as a human. And I think that was the greatest lesson, Tracey, if I'm being honest. It was that, you know, we tell ourselves, don't we, like, I can do this on my own. You can't do it on your own. You need to have self-belief, but the best things achieved with other people.
How long, Mike, how long was that? Was the whole row? Remind us from start to finish.
3,000 miles, 3,000 miles from the Canaries to Antigua. It was the final year of the Telescope Sea Atlantic Challenge, which means I've got the claim to fame being the fastest British person ever to do it. 46 days, 6 hours and 10 minutes. Pretty fast, fueled by just this unrelenting desire to see my family again. And I learned a lot of things on the ocean. I said I learned about what really matters, but motivation is something I think a lot about and where we draw our motivation from. And interestingly for me, the motivation to raise money for the hospital that saved my youngest son's life, that's why I did that thing. It went pretty quickly. And within 48 hours, there was only one motivation left. And that was to see my wife and my children again in Antigua. So with 35 nautical miles to go, a northerly wind, all the fleet on power anchor, I decided to row for 22 hours straight to get into Antigua because I was just so desperate to see my family again. And you'll do anything if the motivation's strong enough.
Is there a never again in there? Or is it a possibility?
I stood on the stage in Antigua and said, that is it. I've done the ocean, never again. And I'm probably going to do one in 2026. I wouldn't do it again on my own. But as I said, I raised money for the hospital that saved my youngest son's life. I was invited to speak at an event with Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh recently, who is the patron of Leeds Children's Hospital. And they're building a new flagship hospital in Leeds, the Great Ormond Street of the North for children. And the experience that I had in the hospital taught me that the NHS don't fund the specialist care and equipment. The care nurses who take hand and footprints of your child because they may not survive. Charities fund that. And so I feel committed now to trying to help even more people. And we've got a project which has just been agreed. I can't talk about it yet because there's a lot of sensitivities around the people involved. But a team of 4 of us will be rowing across the North Atlantic from New York to London in 2026. And we're going to raise multiple millions for MND and Leeds Children's Hospital.
And that wall of evidence is there. And the foundation.
It's there, but you know what? Like, I'm still really nervous. I'll be the skipper on the boat. I'm the only one who's ever been on the ocean before. I've got these people who are really well known on the boat. I've got to bring them back alive. So there's a certain amount of pressure there. Will I be able to do it? We'll find out, won't we?
Yeah.
But I'm pretty certain I'll give my best shot and I'll be all right.
Beautiful. Tom, that must be resonating with you.
I haven't rowed the Atlantic, Tracey, so I can't. I think I've got only admiration for Mike there. That sounds pretty tough, Mike, I've got to say.
I'm thinking of jungle. I'm thinking of
but I think that's a hardcore endurance. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I completely concur with Mike that the building the wall thing is, it's a little step at a time, isn't it? I think that, and this applies maybe to the civilian audience, is that I think people tend to look at the big picture. I mean, you're going to row the Atlantic, you're going to do anything, go do selection for the SAS. Don't look at the whole thing, look at the little pieces of it, put the one foot in front of the other and keep going. I think people get daunted by the fact, and also they overestimate what they can do quickly and then underestimate what they can do in a longer time. So, they go off at Mach 5 and quickly fall over and realize this project's a lot tougher than they thought it was going to be. If you pace yourself, you bite it in little pieces, then you get there, as Mike says, building the wall. I like that.
Yeah, nice. And Helen, you're nodding. Great, you get that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I have not rowed across the Atlantic, so I don't have that experience. Yeah, I'll give it a go. Probably only once. But I agree with Mike's words about failure. And I agree with the small chunks. I mean, certainly in flying training, that taught me resilience, because every single flight is a flight that you do and you achieve. But also every single flight is also a chop ride, which might mean that you lose your job as a pilot or you're thrown out of the Air Force. So you are under constant scrutiny. And so you normalize that pressure. And I think for me, that's where my resilience has come from, in terms of just it's repeated small steps, every flight, get it done. It's another chink in my armor, or a brick in the wall of evidence. And I think you just get used to normalizing sort of pressure and high intensity, and that builds your resilience over time. And I think also that the comment that Mike made about failure and embracing failure is really important, because I think as well, along with every flight that we flew was a chop ride, every flight that we did came with a debrief as well, because obviously you have to debrief, because otherwise no learning takes place. And I think that the criticism in every debrief is honest, sometimes brutal, but it always comes from a place of being constructive. People want you to improve, because at the end of the day, they might be alongside you in war, so they want the team to be as good as it can be. But I think that sort of constant debrief, receiving criticism, not taking yourself too seriously, also allows you to build your resilience, I think, as well. And I think that embracing failure is a really huge part of that. And because it allows you to not let your pride get in the way, because I think pride is a real hindrance to resilience, because it just, you fight every step if you have that pride. Whereas if you just use those building blocks that you've learned, and you are able to adapt to that changing process, I think that helps you build that.
I know, Helen, this is the hot debrief, you call it, isn't it? Yeah. So something that's very established in military and as well in sport. But I've heard it said that sort of when it comes to corporate environments, it's not such a big thing.
Yeah, which I think is a real shame. I mean, we use a mission cycle, so it's a plan, a brief, the flight phase, and then the debrief. And the debrief is arguably the most important part of all of that mission cycle for learning. And I think that businesses could really take that on board. And I think that the main I think what the military does very well is it sets the conditions for everyone to feel empowered to be open and honest, because the debrief will fail if people don't feel like they can what we would call show our tapes on Typhoon. The Typhoon is a single seat aeroplane, and in theory you could throw the keys at the engineers and never tell anyone how you did, because you're the only person in the cockpit. But what we're quite good at, I think, because of that, is we have a really fierce culture of showing our tapes. So everyone does take their tapes, which record the entire sortie, and putting them in the joint tape recorder. It's a bit more sophisticated than that, but not met for a £70 million airplane. You'd think it would be more sophisticated than that. And people literally show their tapes. So they highlight their mistakes so that the whole team can learn. It's really altruistic, because actually people will feel there's a lot of integrity, I think, gained from that. Because actually it's really altruistic, because if you make a mistake and someone learns from that mistake, actually the following day they won't make that mistake, which in different circumstances might have killed them. So I think that that's fairly fatalistic. I realise that won't happen in business, but I think there are a lot of reader crosses, and I think the debrief is really fundamental to culture, learning, and also progress.
Yeah.
So can I just jump in on that, because that's really something that I'm really passionate about, and speak a lot to elite sports teams and businesses about, and that is building trust. You know, trust is the glue that knits the team together. If you don't have trust, you don't have tempo. It's as simple as that. If you're worried about the man left and right of you on a rugby pitch, whether they're going to make the tackle, whether they're going to be in the right position, you ain't concentrating on what you're trying to do. So fostering that culture that Helen speaks so well about, and building that trust within teams through unselfish behaviours. It's a commando quality. I was in the Marines. Being unselfish and doing things for us and putting them first. It's the absolute cornerstone of high performance. If you don't have trust and you're not authentic and you're not showing your tapes, you've got nothing, in my opinion.
And this is what Sid Sutton was talking about in our last session, and not operating in a kind of energy of fear. So the second you start operating in that energy of fear, that sort of trust, that intuition, if you're so focused on that, then you can't do the job properly. So it's being there in the moment. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And I think if we're talking leadership, you know, I know Mike's Marine, and we've got the RAF here. In fact, we've all the services, haven't we? Got all of the Navy, RAF. But at the Army, we go through Sandhurst, and the motto is serve to lead, which I've always taken. You can't ask anybody to do anything you're not prepared to do yourself. So the trust that starts at the top, and you've got to demonstrate to the people around you that you will do what's required. And sometimes in the military, obviously, that means taking risks. But I think in a civilian environment, it just means that you'll rise to the challenges with them and demonstrate that leadership, which I think is really important.
Beautiful. Tom, that leads me on to your question. Let's talk creativity.
Yeah.
So you've previously talked about the necessity of that creativity in military operations. Can you give me an example of where creative thinking was crucial? Obviously, you use that now in your role as a film director and author. Creativity is big. But in that environment, can you give me an example where creativity was crucial, creative thinking, was crucial, and how those lessons can be applied now in business?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start at the end, which is when I joined the film industry. Everyone was surprised that I was from the military. When I joined the film industry, not many people had done that transition. And that led me to question what people think the military does. So, you know, if I take a small example, if you've got a small team, you don't have a lot of resources. So you have to think very outside the box and very creatively. And that really stems from the origins of the SS, which is something I've written quite a bit about, which is those small teams were created for one reason, which we couldn't beat the German army. And we had to think of very creative solutions. And that ethos exists in the British military today. I can't speak for the RAF and Marines because I'm not, I can speak for the Marines. I've worked with the Marines. They're very, very adaptable, Mike, and very creative. But I think the resilience is the building block. Of course, if you're going to be in the military, you have to be tough. That's the building block. But then if you're not creative, if you're not coming up with solutions outside the box, thinking differently, the Chinese philosopher called it the art of war, because it's an art, not a science. And I think that's a really important element in military thinking that people outside the military don't realize that can be applied to the civilian world.
Helen, you're nodding there, that resonates?
It does. Obviously, my military environment is completely different to that. So I'm going to be slightly controversial and say that actually in the cockpit, you can't be creative, really. There are exceptions to that rule. But let's talk a big air-to-air fighting war where I'm maybe leading 50 other airplanes. Those 50 airplanes of mine may be spread out by 100 miles, and my closest wingman may be 10 miles away. So we can't chat because every one of those airplanes is on one radio frequency. So comm time, it's called, is at a premium. So we can't discuss things. And we can't read each other's body language necessarily either, because we're 10 miles apart and we can only see each other on our sensors in the cockpit. So the time to be creative actually isn't then, because you're all supersonic at 30,000 feet. And as a leader, I need to be predictable. So actually the cockpit's actually a really bad place to be creative. The time for that, though, I'm not saying that we are just robots. It's in the plan and the brief. So that's the time where we earn our money in terms of leaders and being creative. And I absolutely agree with what Tom said. But that's the time we can all sit down. I can, as a leader or as a mission commander, I can sit with my team of experts and take their theories and take their advice, because I know a little bit of everything, but I don't know certain, bits and bobs in depth. And that's the time where I can brainstorm, if we're allowed to say that term. I'm not sure where we are now, but and be creative and think outside the box and come up with new techniques, tactics to defeat the newest piece of equipment that the enemy have got. So I feel like I sort of switch in and out of creativity, if that makes sense. I think there are times that we use it, and then there are definitely times where we don't. And certainly flying around at 600 miles an hour when you're shooting missiles along with 50 other people is probably, unfortunately, not the time, because they need you to be predictable and they need to know what your next move is, if that makes sense. And if I went off on one, for want of a better phrase, then that might not actually be conducive to the plan, if that makes sense.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Mike, how does that translate into civilian world and businesses?
Well, there's so much there. I mean, look, no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? You can plan as much as you want, but you can't control the outcome. Tom spoke about process. It's all about the process. For me, every operation, they're the best agent runners, the best undercover operators that I worked alongside were the most creative, for sure, because they tried to understand the individual that they were trying to recruit and what motivated them and what life did we need to wrap around that individual to make them make a decision to not go and join ISIS, but to come and help us understand ISIS better. And trying to think about the individual, I think, is really important in business. Leadership's not about, for me anyway, projects or budgets or people. That's management. Leadership is about change, and it's about championing change and trying to find different ways to do things, because there's a million and one ways to skin a cat. And the best businesses, in my mind, are the ones who adapt to those challenges and find new paths. And the best leaders are the ones who can articulate that vision and then get everyone to follow them. And to Helen's point, I think you're quite right, Helen, there about the predictability. For me, I think what that creates is credibility within leaders, because you are doing what you said you were going to do. And there's nothing worse. We've got a general election, haven't we? I don't want to go into politics. General election in a month at the time, whatever, 2 months' time. And none of them are credible because they all change their mind every 2 bloody minutes. So you've got to be creative, as Tom says, and you've absolutely got to be predictable and credible, like Helen said.
Beautiful. Mike, this question isn't on the list, but I feel I want to ask it. Looking at that style of leadership and looking forward to 5 years' time, when obviously we're in a state of change, and hopefully we're going to get some change in it as we move forward. But what kind of leaders, what kind of person is going to be leading in 5 years' time?
Do worry about that, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think we all do, don't we? I'd like to think that someone would lead and come to power who has authenticity. It's a word I've used quite a bit. It's a word that's banded around, but I'll explain what it means to me. So authenticity for me is the alignment of 3 things. It's what you think, it's what you say, and it's what you do. And quite often people say things and they don't do them. Or they think a certain way but say something else because they think someone else wants them to say it. Be yourself. I say this to everyone I speak to. The best thing you can be, you've been hired by that business because of your unique combination of strengths and weaknesses and flaws and amazing attributes. Be yourself. Don't show up to work with a mask on trying to be someone else you're not, because you're worried about what they might think. I think having the courage to do that, and it takes courage, is absolutely key. So I hope whatever happens in the future in politics, that we have a leader who, for the first time in a long time, says they're going to do something and then goes ahead and does it.
Tom, you're agreeing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what Mike's saying, and I think what I'd say is that these leaders are operating from a position of fear, and fear's the mind killer. They can't get beyond the fact that they're scared. I guess not going to swear. They're scared, and therefore they're scared of everything they do. That every decision will reflect badly. The decision will go, through the press, through social media, whatever. You can't function like that. You just can't. You've got to move through the fear and just get on with what you've got to do. Sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it's not. We just don't have people who are doing that, and I think that's a cross-party thing rather than getting into politics. Oh, right, it's an election, but yeah, but that's what I think. That's what I think.
Yeah, but either politics or otherwise, this is as relevant at the sort of helm of a business or corporation as it is at the helm of a country. So it's highly relevant. Helen, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I was just going to echo Mike's points about being yourself. It's interesting because I was asked recently to speak to a young female pilot that was coming through, and she was like, I just can't seem to find my place. I try and be this person, and it blows up in my face, and I try and be this person, and I'm like, well, that's the problem. You're not. Just be yourself, like Mike said. That the best person you can be is yourself. And if you try and be something else, then you're going to have no credibility or composure. So just relax. I hate the phrase "be true to yourself," but I guess that's probably the point, isn't it?
There's something else there, Tracey. Sorry, there's something else there for me anyway, about vulnerability, right? As a leader,
yes,
the leaders I've met, most of them are winging it. I don't care how big your business is. I know I've got friends, £100 million turnover businesses. They're winging it most days. They're not really sure if that's the right decision. They're not really sure if that merger and acquisition is the right path. But the best ones are the ones who say, I'm not that sure, actually. I was at an event once and I heard this CEO, who's a friend of mine now, say that in front of 500 staff members. Someone asked him what we're doing next. He said, you know what? I'm not quite sure. And it was the most powerful thing that he could have said. Everyone in the room would have followed him anywhere he wanted to go at that point. I think if we're a little bit more vulnerable, particularly us fellas, a little bit more open, people will want to work with us and underneath us.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think with our leaders, they're trying to control the narrative. So they keep it very close to a very small group of people. They don't consult wider, and they don't bring, in this case, their parties or their organizations with them. And that's where we get these bad decisions from. That's what I think, anyway.
Okay. And it's showing. So you said, Mike, that story about your CEO friend. So in that moment that he showed his humanity, in the moment he showed he was human, that gave everybody else permission to be human too, and to feel.
Well, we're all unsure, aren't we? No, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, really. And that uncertainty it exposes us somewhat, and it makes us feel vulnerable. And I think when you've got a leader of an organization at any scale of business who's just honest and says, I'm not sure. When they are sure, they say, I'm absolutely sure, we're going over here. But when they're not sure, don't try and bluff your way through it. Build that trust. Show that you're normal. Show that you're like everybody else. Because then what will happen is all of your people will start to do the same. And they'll be honest about how the way they feel. And no one knows in a business who's going to have the next best idea that moves the business from where they are today to where they want to be. It probably won't be the CEO. It might well be the newest member of the team. But guess what? They ain't going to put their hand up if they've not had that trust and experience. So important.
Yeah. I want to say hello to Matt Lindley, if he's one of our other speakers, if he's watching tonight, because that's something that he talks about a lot. is that being, you know, precisely that. You don't know where the best idea is going to come from, and you have to have that communication right from, you know, right throughout the whole organization, how important that is. Right, Helen, you're up next. We're going to talk about balancing decisive action with empathy. Obviously, sort of emphatic leadership is so important, but there's a time and a place for it, as we talked about before. And you've previously spoken about the need to be, which I know, knowing the kind of woman you are and the kind of leader you are, how incredibly compassionate you are. But I know that in those high stakes environments, that's not the place necessarily to be compassionate, and you need to be slightly more dispassionate. How do you balance the need for decisive action with empathy and understanding in that leadership role?
I think it's really tricky. I think it comes from experience. And, you know, as we've just said, you don't always get it right. I think it's all very contextual. I mean, the example I used earlier on was a big air-to-air war where everyone's fighting and shooting missiles. But that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of a fighter pilot's job is potentially close air support, where you are a single aeroplane and you've got bombs on, and you are speaking to a person on the ground that is being shot at, and they need you to drop a bomb on the person that is shooting at them to save their lives. So actually, in that situation, whilst the cockpit is clinical, it has to be clinical for the reasons that I've already spoken about. Actually, that's a scenario where you really need to build a rapport of trust between you and that one person on the radio, because it's only your two voices that are on that radio, really quickly, because their lives are in your hands. And the empathy comes from, you know, you're sitting in a cockpit at 15,000 feet. You can see the ground, you can see the area that they're in, but you can see it completely differently, because you're at a totally different aspect to them, who potentially are behind a wall in a you know, dugout with sand, dust, heat, dark, bullets flying. And both of you need to almost put yourself in each other's shoes in that high pressure situation to go, actually, what can that other person see? And at some point you need to, using, I think, empathy, figure out what the other person sees so that you can both get your eyes on the same target and hit the right target. And that's a time potentially where you do need to use empathy in a high stress situation. But I do hark back to that I think the ability to make decisions in high pressure comes from composure. And I think that composure is really key, certainly in a and I keep talking about a fighter pilot well, because that's all I know, right? So you need to be calm and clear on the radio, because people will follow you because they trust you, because you're composed. And I think that composure, if you step back a step, you know, the plan and the brief that we spoke about, where you think about the what ifs. The what ifs are absolutely critical. As Mike said, plan A never survives first contact with the enemy, and you need to have thought about plan B, plan C, and plan D, because you need those up your sleeves to buy you that thinking time at 600 miles an hour, to give you that composure to be able to make those decisions under pressure. And, you know, we call that thinking at 1G, i.e. on the ground, because that's the time to do it, as opposed to in the cockpit when your hair's on fire. A bit like the duck paddling analogy, you might come across clear and calm on the radio, but your hair's on fire in the cockpit because you're doing 1,001 things at one time. So I think that having a really good time to plan, think, brief, do all the thinking prior to getting into either the cockpit or a high pressure business meeting, and walking in there confidently, knowing that you've thought about every single eventuality, is, I think, personally, one of the biggest keys to success in being able to make decisive, can you say decisive decisions? But, you know, on the spot decisions when the pressure is on, because you can fall back on the fact that you've already thought about that. And I think that's one of the biggest keys to success. Okay, beautiful. And that, Helen's composure, Mike, is the fourth of your C's, isn't it?
Well, it is now. Well, I had three C's for leadership, which was courage, clarity, and credibility. It's now composure. Yeah, I think calm is contagious, isn't it? Same as culture, it's contagious. Interestingly, we talked about COVID earlier, Helen. Sorry, you've been ill all week. The rate of infection, the R number, exists in culture as well. It's 1.59. Researchers have shown it. So for every positive behavior you bring into the business, it positively affects 1.5 people. And every time you bring a negative behavior to the table, it affects negatively 1.5 people. So it's really everyone's responsibility to show up every day and give it the best. I think I'll say a couple of things about leadership and empathy, if I can, Tracey. The first one is, look, leadership is everything about you as a leader and nothing about you. It's about unlocking the hidden potential in others, in my opinion. It's having the courage to create change. It's being really clear about the vision and what you expect from yourself and for everybody else. It's having the credibility of, doing what you say you're going to do. And it's having that composure when the chips are down. And it's not forgetting the people either. I was in Manchester yesterday interviewing Graham Souness, of all people, crazy. I was just telling the guys earlier, I made him cry on stage, which is my claim to fame. Forget the Atlantic. I think I've cracked it now. I've made Graham Souness cry. But yesterday was 7 years to the day of the Manchester Arena bombing, the Ariana Grande concert, the MEN.
Of course it was, yeah.
And I was on the ground within a very short amount of time trying to deal with the aftermath of that with colleagues and make sure that the other bomb that hadn't been found yet wasn't going to go off somewhere else in Manchester. And of all of the things I experienced in those 20 years in the military and in the MOD, that experience was the most toughest, and we took it to heart and we took it personally. It was on our patch, and we felt a great deal of responsibility for what had happened. 22 people killed, 1,017 people injured. And it's those moments when the chips are really down. And in a business context, that is financial usually. When the chips are down and things are struggling, don't forget your people. They're people. And it goes back to the first thing I said about the ocean. Like, once you've been alone, the most important thing is this. It's connecting with others. It's other people. It's hearing their stories. Don't forget the people, is what I'd say.
Beautiful. Tom.
No, it's very wise, Mike. I think Mike's is entirely right. I think that going back to Helen's point, though, this thing that where sometimes people are going to look to you to be steady. I'm glad Helen said that pilots are calm. Every pilot I ever spoke to was incredibly calm in the air. And now I know they're taught to do that. I didn't know that was a technique before. But no, there is a moment where, in these crisis situations, you do need to be the steady person. Have a bad you're feeling. They're looking to you to not be the person, you're standing on the burning deck. You've got to be the person that everyone looks at and goes, oh, well, at least that person doesn't look like they're panicking, even if you are. I think that is a feature, Mike, and I think that can apply to the civilian world. In financial situations when companies are having a lot of trouble, if you are a director or a CEO, you have to, front it up in front of people and go, it's going to be okay, even if maybe sometimes you don't totally buy that morning.
Is it okay, Tom, then to say, as Mike was talking about earlier, to say, look, do you know what? I'm going to be honest. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that I will know. Can you have those two to balance it like that?
I think that really depends on the situation. And Mike, I don't know, you'll come back on me on this. I think sometimes you got to carry the day, and to carry the day, you got to be the person that everyone believes. I totally get being humble, listening, but I think on the odd occasion, you got to go, yeah, we're going to be able to do this. We've got this. It happens all the time on film sets, all the time. This is nothing like you experience, Mike, but, we run out of time. We run out of resources, and you just got to be the person that, we'll get through this, even if you don't actually 100% believe that yourself. People are looking to you, and they'll do it because you believe it. Well, you show you're believing it. Mike, what do you think about that? Or do you think I'm just talking rubbish?
There's a time and a place.
I don't think you're talking rubbish. I do think there's something about, like, absolutely owning it if you think the art of the possible exists. So, like, I think we might be able to do this, and inside you're thinking we probably won't, but we're going to go and do it. Then absolutely lean into it. But if you know it's not going to work, you absolutely know the ship.
No, I'm not talking running into the minefield here. I'm talking, there's a chance we're going to get out. We're not going to do that. I'm talking like, in that moment you've got to go. We can probably get out. You've got to be the person that we are going to get out, and it's going to be fine. In your head, you might be thinking there is a 20% chance this is going to work, or whatever the percentage is. But you can carry people with you in that situation.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It comes back, I think, to that wall of evidence, that self-belief, that even if there is only a 20% chance, you believe as the leader because you've done it time and time and time again, that you can turn that 20 into 99%. Never 100, but maybe 99.
Tom, I'm really curious. Can you? There's a story in there, isn't there? Can you tell? Can you
There's
share?
no stories. I have no stories.
Can
No.
you share a story with us?
What can I share you stories? Okay, I can share a story because this is not a secret. So I was on in a team in Cambodia, and we got cut off. And it was getting dark. Basically, long story short, we had a problem with one of our vehicles. We got trapped in the jungle, and at nightfall, the jungle belonged to the Khmer Rouge. So we then had to, before anyone gets excited, this is not the Special Forces. This is me as a United Nations military observer. And there was that moment where I thought we could be in a situation where we're not going to get out of the jungle, and we are about 5 clicks from the Khmer Rouge here, and they will come on this road that night, and that will be the end of us. And I was thinking this is going to be quite a tough moment for everybody. We got out was the answer. We got the vehicle fixed and we got out. But there was that moment with the sun setting and, my Australian signaller looking into the jungle. I was thinking, this is pretty ropey.
Okay. Oh, Helen, share a story with us if you can, as to that sort of when you had to, even if it was convince yourself that it was going to be okay.
I probably won't go with childbirth, but that's the one that first springs to mind.
Worse. I think Helen, that's the ultimate.
I mean,
what was it?
Yeah,
you said when we were chatting before, this too will end. This will end.
Yes. So I haven't said that because it sounds very negative, but so what I said about resilience earlier is true, but I have a very individual technique, which is to just repeat to myself, this will end, over and over again. And I don't know whether it's and actually the first time I really employed it and it really worked was on the conduct of the capture course that you have to do. So it's to go on the front line, you have to essentially practice being captured and interrogated. And it's obviously not very nice because they put you in the situations where, they expose you to anything that you could possibly suffer. And I remember sitting in a stress position about 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter in an old random sort of brick building. And I said to myself over and over again, this will end, very slowly. And it calmed my breathing. And for some reason, it just worked. And I used exactly the same method in childbirth. And it did. She eventually popped out. So, and like I said, resilience is really personal. Like I would never tell anyone how to be resilient because I think you just have to, as we've said before, learn it and experience. You go through, you get through those experiences, you combat those setbacks and those changes, and you just learn and grow resilience, I think. And that's just my method, but
no, it
works for me.
It works. Mike, what are your techniques for just calming it down? Because you found yourself in some pretty high stress, high impact situations. What do you do to just calm it down, slow it down, or do you not? Is it just right? This is what we've got to do right now. Let's get on with it. Or can you?
I still get nervous when I speak. Like if I'm being really honest, like honestly, any gig, yeah, really. Even though I've spoken many times all over the world, that every time before I go on stage, there's that moment leading up where you're just thinking this could go wrong. So I think the power of breath is really important. So controlling your breath, and there's techniques you can learn to just slow and deregulate. That self-regulation is so important. I know it's one of the SBS, maybe SBS's kind of like key cornerstones as well. That self-regulation. You're going to kick a door in, the Taliban on the other side, and then you've got to go home and be Tom Petch again, right? That's difficult, isn't it? So that self-regulation. That self-regulation is so tough. Yeah. I mean, look, there's a couple of times in my life now where, and the two that sprung to mind when Helen was talking there, because she mentioned childbirth, was, my youngest son was born 9 weeks early. He was 3 pounds. He was wet through. He couldn't breathe. He was ventilated on life support for 72 hours. And you stood by his bedside hoping that he'll make it through. We had a 10-month-old at home who was being fed through a tube because he was born early. And we got Gabriel through a 6-week process of high dependency, intensive care, special care, got him home. And then he was sleeping a lot. And I thought, that's great. He's catching up. I've read all the parenting books. And my wife said, I've just got a funny feeling it's not right. Took him to the hospital. I went off to follow a terrorist around all day, as you do. And I got a call an hour later and said, if you hadn't brought him in today, he'd have been dead tomorrow. He had meningitis. Back in intensive care again. And Tom made a point earlier, which I thought was really important. You don't think at that moment about getting your son home. You think about the next minute, and you watch that screen, and you watch the sats, and you watch the heartbeat and the heart rate, and you say, let's have another minute at that. Let's have another minute. Like, okay, let's have 5. And it was the same on the ocean as well. 1 more oar stroke. There's 4 million oar strokes to get from the Canaries to Antigua, 3,000 miles, 4 million. You ain't thinking about Antigua all the time. You're thinking about the next wave, the next oar stroke, and controlling what you can control.
Yeah. Beautiful, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe for an audience that you don't have to, no offense, but you don't have to row the Atlantic. If you're just going to the gym, you can build this kind of mindset. You know, you can do it on a rowing machine. You can do things that hurt. You know, take yourself to the edge of whatever your physical level is, and that will make you strong. It's a muscle. It's a mental muscle, literally. I think Mike might agree on how you can make your mind stronger by trying these things, and like Mike's saying, you're building your wall that way. If you don't do it, you don't have that ability, and when things get tough, you won't have that ability.
Yeah, I think people often think that, oh, so when it really comes down to it, I'll be okay. Like, you won't. You won't. I mean, I Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt for 6 years, got a big academy here in the UK, 500 students, and the amount of people who've walked through my front door. Yeah, but if I really got attacked in an alleyway, I'd be all right. Like, you wouldn't. You wouldn't, because you've never experienced that level of fear, that amygdala hijack of fight, flight, freeze. You don't know. So you've got to expose yourself to challenges all the time. Same in business. If you're taking it, if you're not taking risks sometimes in business, you ain't pushing the envelope. You ain't going to get to where you could possibly get to. So I totally agree with you, Tom. I think you can do it anywhere. You can do it anytime. It's just extending your grasp slightly beyond your reach.
Nice. I want to ask you guys what, I always want, with all of our speakers, I'm always sort of saying, well, your story is your story, but what are you doing now? Are you in the arena? What's your next project? Where are you pushing yourself? Where's the growth coming from? Mike, we know that you I'm allowed to say that, aren't I? From a challenge coming up. Well, Helen, where are you?
This is all out. No, but certainly being a female pilot, the only one on Typhoon for 5 years, you really got told to not put yourself out there, because I had there was an ISIS website that said Flight Lieutenant Helen Seymour is a war criminal, because they'd got a picture of me shaking David Cameron's hand after a op sortie in Libya. So you really are sort of putting your head above a parapet, so you always get told not to. So for 20 odd years, that's what I've done. So actually me speaking to people, not speaking to people, because I'm obviously, as you can tell, more than happy doing that, but publicly, I guess, is the biggest difference for me. This is completely out of my comfort zone, which is great, because I didn't know where I was going to go when I left the military, because it's such a lifestyle. It's not just a job, it's your whole existence. That's certainly how I felt, my identity. And then suddenly it ends when you get told to leave, and it's like, right, okay, wow, it's a big world out there, and I thought I could easily just do something, with the military, which I am, which is great, but also I really wanted to do something completely different, and for me, this is it. So that's what I'm doing.
Let me say, from somebody who was watching you every step of the way, that you are doing brilliantly.
Only because you're fantastic mentor, so thank you. But yeah, I mean, this is it's great to be outside your comfort zone, isn't it? Though, I mean, it's nice to be in it. Don't get me wrong, but I think that you become a very sort of boring, blunt person if you stay inside your comfort zone for too long. I think you need to push yourself, as Mike and Tom said, to really achieve what you want to achieve. And I want, my daughter to be proud of me, and I want to be able to teach her that going outside of your comfort zone is also a good thing. And I want her to see that I'm doing it and that it's okay. There are limits, obviously, but I do want her to know that it's a good thing to do.
Oh God, absolutely. And I think I want to sort of reference the mountain. This is your mountain, Mike. I think you've spoken about this in the past. It's what's your mountain. Your mountain doesn't have to be Everest. You don't have to be rowing the ocean. It's where is it? What are you stepping into that you're overcoming yourself? And so it doesn't have to be of enormous magnitude. It can be something smaller, which to you is, I know how well you're doing. I know this is a big deal for you. And I know what you're going to be doing in London next month with an amazing group of women. There's all sorts of things. You're doing fantastically. Keep going. Tom, what's your mountain?
Well, my mountain. Well, my most recent mountain was that book, because I was a dyslexic at school. I spelt my names backwards, and nobody could read my handwriting. The fact that I managed to write a book of 150,000 words and have it published by Penguin is like that was I had to tie myself to the desk. So I've done one, and I will do another. The second one hopefully will be easier than the first, at least easier on my family, who didn't enjoy the experience. Not very good at being at a desk. And then the films, I mean, I know this sounds strange, but films are very hard work. They're incredibly hard work, and I've got 2 more in the pipeline, and that is always it's like a startup each time, but I love it, and I absolutely love it, and I love the creativity. So yeah, some challenges coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. I know all of you guys are all doing absolutely brilliant things. Thank you. Right, we're going to move into the Q&A section. We've got a few popping up here now. Okay. The first question is to Helen. I'm going to have to put my glasses on to read this. Helen, how do you approach leadership differently now compared to when you were in the RAF? Great question.
It's a great question, and actually it's difficult for me to answer because I've only been out a year. So I'm still learning. I guess as a leader, you always learn, don't you? And I think the day you stop learning is sort of the day you die, sort of thing. And now I'm waffling because I don't know how to answer that. I would say though that one lesson I did learn towards the end of my career, and Rosie and I speak about this in our keynote, is that actually I think a real key point to leadership is learning about followership. And I got a really stark lesson in that from a time at a big exercise in America that you fly in. I was the mission commander, and my deputy was a really aggressive American pilot. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Are you sure you don't want me to lead this?" And I thought, well, that's not very, I mean, if he had any empathy whatsoever, he would realize that I was really nervous because these missions in America are really big and complex and really high pressure. So to step up and lead one of those is a huge deal. So actually that was a really interesting lesson for me, followership, to then, because I think as a leader, you can also be a good follower. And I think that they're sort of almost intertwined. And I think that was a really important lesson at the end of my career. And I think that's actually probably one of the most important lessons I've taken with me to actually now, certainly that, I'm working in a more collaborative environment maybe, and I'll always now try and follow people as well as I would like to be followed, if that makes sense. And I don't think I'd really realised that until I had that situation. So I wouldn't say that my leadership has evolved necessarily from leaving the military, because I haven't had that long out of the military yet. But I would say that my leadership as a whole has evolved in order to be a better follower as well, just because of that one incident.
Okay, and that's the key word there, is evolve. It's not static.
Yeah, I think it's
constantly. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I think you become a bad leader when you stop learning how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Right, what we got next? Okay, what has been the most surprising or challenging aspect of the transition from military careers? Let's get Mike, take that one.
So I'm going to say something that I don't mean this in a really bad way, so forgive me. So I'm going to pretext it by saying I'm going to say something quite controversial. So leaving a 20-year career and realizing that no one cares. And no one cares because life moves on. You are just a number at the end of the day, and someone will sit in your seat. And I watched many, many amazing agent handlers, undercover officers who'd worked for years, keeping our country safe, retire or resign. I remember one particularly used to sit next to him, and someone else came and sat in his seat, someone different, logged on, and within a few weeks, we never spoke about him ever again. And the same happened with me. You know, you think that, you know, this band of brothers, you're going to continue on and on and on. Certainly in my experience, it might only be me, by the way. It could just be Mike Bates that no one liked to talk to, but people move on and they get on. And I think it's accepting that, you know, life is a meandering path. It's not a linear from A to B journey. And you're going to follow some people and you're going to not follow some people, and they're going to follow you and then they're not. And that's absolutely fine. Just be comfortable in your own skin and go for it, I say.
Well, thank you, Mike. That's thought-provoking. Tom, it's got me thinking, Mike. Tom, what role does mental health play in your approach to leadership, and how do you ensure it is prioritized in high-stress environments?
Yeah, mental health's everything. I think, and I don't know if Helen and Mike might agree with me. I don't think when I was in the military, I really thought much about that. I was young and I was hungry and I did a lot of stuff. And I think it was only after I left the military, I ever thought about looking after that, you know. And now I do a lot of stuff, you know. I'll be open. I have had therapy. I, you know, talk to people regularly, build a network of friends, you know, all the good stuff. Meditate, make sure you exercise regularly, don't drink alcohol, don't take drugs, never took drugs anyway. You know, all of this stuff is how are you going to get up and lead anybody if you yourself are a mess? But I think if I go back to my 20-year-old self, he'd go, what are you talking about, Tom? You're indestructible. So my life lesson was in the 20-year-old soldier turning into the 50-something old, you know, ex-veteran filmmaker. That's quite a transition. But yeah, you've got to look after your brain. It is the most important thing. Your health and your mental health is the most important thing.
Yeah, leadership starts with yourself, and leadership starts with knowing yourself. Beautiful. Okay, and the last question here. Hi all, thank you for sharing your stories, your words, and your wisdom. We've talked about how the world is a dynamic place and change is constant. What one word nugget, say skill, quality, or technique, has remained constant in ensuring high performance? Great question. It's from Nim. Great question.
Only one nugget. Oh God, that's tough, isn't it? Because I think there's a lot that goes into high performance.
I'll go on, Mike. You're going to go first?
Well, I've used the word authenticity before, right? So, like, I think, you know, you've got to show up as yourself. But I think the other thing I would say is you've got to be a community, not a crowd. We spoke about it earlier. If you're in a business at any level, everyone in the business is a leader to some degree. I always ask that question when I speak. Who in the audience is a leader? And I get 4 people on the front row put their hands up. I'm like, no, everyone put their hands up. You've all got a responsibility to show up every single day. You've all got a responsibility to nurture this culture and create this community. And if you do that, I think you've got the foundations for high performance. There's a lot more that goes into it, but that is the start for me.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Tom?
Yeah, I'm going to go with humble. I think that was something I learned. I think that, but if you're not listening to the people around you, if you're not taking the advice, and I'll go back to my 20-year-old self, I certainly learned this, you know, the hard way sometimes. You know, if you're humble, if you go into every situation thinking I've got something to learn, properly listen to people and what they're saying, and that will get you a lot of help. You can go and be humble, ask for the help. If I don't know the answer, go and ask someone, that is a big key learning as a leader. Don't just pretend you know it or stand up there and tough it out. That's been a life lesson that I'm still learning, to be honest.
And also not surrounding yourself with yes people. So be challenged, be prepared to be challenged.
Tracey, a good friend of mine, Kevin Sinfield, many people know him, one of the greatest rugby leaders of our generation, raised millions for MND through his challenges, and may or may not be, I can't confirm nor deny, be rowing the Atlantic with him in a couple of years' time. But Kev says that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most amount of time with. And that is something that I think a lot about. So who are the 5 in your life that you spend the most amount of time with? And are they bringing you up or are they pushing you down?
Definitely bringing me up anyway. Helen, final word from you, my lovely.
Oh, I mean, humble and authenticity are right, are bang on right. So I think I'm going to stick with mine. I'm going to stick with composure because in high performance, the pressure's on. And I think that if you are calm, confident, composed, I think you've done, you're halfway there already. And I think that that obviously you allow yourself to be composed, to have composure. I'm not going to say composed, but to have composure from the preparation that you've done prior to that, and that thinking, and that the planning, and knowing that you've thought about every eventuality. So I guess I'm cheating slightly in that I'm using the word composure to encompass a whole plethora of sort of the mission cycle, as it were, to use a military term. But I do think that if you are calm and composed, then I think people will naturally gravitate to you as a leader. And I think that you will have that you will have bought yourself that time to think in those high pressure situations, which time is always going to be the critical element that you need. And I think that's, for me, in high pressure situations, that's the key.
Perfect. What a composed, wonderful space to bring this to a close this evening. That went very fast, didn't it? Thank you, all of you guys, for joining us. For those watching, thank you for your time. I hope that you took something from it and you've got some actionable insights that you can put straight into play out there in your own worlds. And don't forget, all of these speakers are all available to book through 360. Jump onto the website. It's www.360speakers.co.uk, and you can find all of their profiles. Okay, if booking speakers is on your agenda this year, and even if not, even if you just want to be a little bit inspired, go take a look, okay, and get in touch if you need to. Right, everybody, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evenings and the rest of your weeks. A long bank holiday weekend coming up here in England, so enjoy it. And I will speak to you all again very soon. Thank you, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.